The rumors that you've heard is true. We have moved from Arizona back to California and have a place in Escondido. We brought 108 roses in containers and have already bought 12 from Vintage Gardens and are starting a new garden. So California and I have become again. Today's subject are the new guidelines for judging challenge class and collection. And here I'm going to start off by pressing the wrong button.
Up and down arrow, remember?
Up and down arrow. My program is actually based upon a program and uses a good deal of the program that Susan Klingenpeel gave at the Denver National Convention, which was the first program on the new guidelines. The Board of Directors of the American Rose Society adopted the new guidelines at the convention on June 29th. I still haven't heard an official story as to when they are officially official. I mean, they're official, they're adopted, we're supposed to be applying them. My experience in all judging guidelines is that it kind of leaks slowly out, and as you will see when we go through it, although there's a number of things that new, my sense is that they actually represent things that we're already doing and more of a validation of them. Susan has a committee, the National Judges Committee, which consists of the chairman of judges of all of the all the district chairmen, chairpersons, chairs. I haven't ever got that right. Chair. It sounds like a piece of furniture. Just call somebody a chair. Anyway, all the chairs of the districts are on the committee, and then there are a number of at-large members of the committee. Susan put a half a dozen exhibitors on the committee in the at-large position, and I am one of those at-large people on the committee. And so I was involved in the adoption of these guidelines. I can tell you, in fact, Susan had some figures on it as to how many emails this generated over a period of time, and I can tell you it was a lot. There was a lot of discussion that went on and on and on, and a lot of good discussion. Bruce Monroe wrote up the first set of the writing of what we were attempting to do. Harold Baker of Florida, outstanding exhibitor, wrote up the second one, and we kicked around the language, and the language went around and around and around, and when we finally took votes and made decisions, then the final language, the two, in fact, who are responsible for the final language are myself and Jolene Adams. So you can blame us. We wrote it at the end of the day, drawing on all of the decisions that were made. We start with some basic information, which I'm sure most of you or all of you know. What is a challenge class? An exhibit containing one or more specimens or one or more multiple containers supplied or placed by the exhibitor. Another way of saying a challenge class is one that's designated as such in the show schedule. And you should know that all the national and the district trophies are challenge classes. And one of the major features of a challenge class is that the exhibitor places the challenge class on the show table. And because the exhibitor places it, the positioning and presentation of exhibits in a challenge class is part of the overall appearance. And in a challenge class, the overall appearance counts, and most of what the changes in the guidelines have to do with is overall appearance and how it is evaluated and how it counts in the judging process for the challenge class. It becomes, in a challenge class, a prime element. You will recall the changes last time. I think it was when we began calling the point scoring system the prime elements. I've never become comfortable with that. I don't know if anybody else has. A prime element sounds like something that's on a menu for me. But it becomes a prime element. The reasons for the revision, first of all, the objective was to simplify the judging process, to improve the clarification and explanation of things for new judges. And some of you may have been at the judging seminar we had, I guess it was 2 years ago, where I in fact spoke to this district about judging challenge classes, and I got involved in trying to explain the point scoring system for overall appearance, particularly for new judges. And I know the new judges who were sitting there taking the test, it just glassed over because it was really tough to explain what the old system is or was to new judges. There is an important point to understand in the politics of putting this together, but the politics also have to do with approaches toward judging. Challenge classes, and I think I may have been responsible in part for this, and I pointed out in my book, Showing Good Roses, that challenge class and the overall appearance actually draws on arrangement judges' principles. And there has always been the tension between arrangement judges and horticultural judges in the American Rose Society, and those of us who are both, such as myself, I'm sometimes amused by it. We have a number of members on the Horticultural Judging Committee, and they want to make darn sure that we emphasize and that we re-emphasize and that we re-emphasize again that a challenge class is a horticultural exhibit, and that the primary emphasis of the challenge class is on the individual blooms. It is a rose show, and that the arrangement, if it's a wonderful arrangement of the challenge class and they're all crappy blooms, you're not supposed to become an arrangement judge and say that's wonderful, it wins, it's got the best arrangement. So I could point out, we have like Bob House on the committee, who is one of the finest exhibitors of hybrid teas in the nation. We have Satish Prabhu from South Carolina, is one of the finest exhibitors of hybrid teas. Satish Prabhu, I think, hates arrangements, and so he was continuously pushing to emphasize the individual blooms. And then there were people such as myself who are arrangement judges who kept bringing in arrangement concepts, and you will find them in the final product. We wanted to equalize the judging of stemmed and non-stemmed exhibits, and I will explain this in a minute of how they were unequal before. And we wanted to address challenge classes that are not addressed in the guidelines. The guidelines address challenge classes that were popular at the time that they were first adopted. There have been a number of challenge classes that have become popular in rose shows, and they're not addressed at all in the guidelines. And so our effort was to attempt to bring those into the guidelines so that we have a discussion of them in the guidelines, particularly for the newer judges who just will encounter something like a palette, for example, and say, well, how do you judge a palette? And the old guidelines really didn't say very much on that subject. Let us start with the prime elements. Prime elements, we will recall, form 25 points, color 20, 15, substance, stem and foliage 20, balance and proportion 10, size 10. The factors that have to do with the bloom, form, color, substance, and size, are 70 points. It's a rose show and not a stem and foliage show. I always remind people 70 points is the bloom, 30 points the stem and the foliage, and the balance and the proportion. These are the prime elements with which we are all familiar. The old method of judging challenge class point scoring in a stemmed class, and you will recall this, that each bloom in an entry gets 100 points for the horticultural appearance, and we were supposed to take 10 points per bloom to be used for overall appearance. For example, you have a collection of 3 blooms. There are 300 points for the horticultural excellence, the 3 times 100, and there are 30 points for the overall appearance. These are the old rules I emphasize. This is what we were in theory doing, assuming any of us understood this. There's 330 points. I often thought maybe I should take a calculator sometime and just baffle some new judges that I'm walking around with and do that. Because you see, here's the calculation. If 300 of the 330 points were horticultural excellence, then 90.9% was horticultural excellence, and 9.1% was the overall appearance. Now that is a real fine number. We were applying exactly 9.1% to overall appearance. Now does anybody believe that is in fact what was going on? That it was only 9.1%, or even exactly 9.1%, or even that you could do something like overall appearance to 0.1%? Clearly not, and that's the reason for these changes. It gets even funnier. I thought it was funny. When you have blooms without stems, because we've already pointed out you've got blooms, 70 points are applied to the bloom, but now you have the 30 points for stem and foliage and balance and proportion, and you have nothing to apply them to. So according to the old guidelines, is you took those and you put them into overall appearance. Plus the 10 points per bloom went into overall appearance. So you had the following calculation: 70 points for horticultural excellence and 40 points for overall appearance. And you have an example of an English box here: 420 points for horticultural excellence, 240 for overall appearance. And presto amazo, in an English box, 36.4% had to do with the appearance, which is kind of interesting if you think about it, because if you have 6 blooms that are hybrid teas in separate containers, you have many different ways that you can stage them, many things that you can do with an overall appearance. But in a box, there are only 6 holes. So somehow, and what you have done in those holes was supposed to be 36.4% of the overall appearance. Does anybody here believe we actually did that? No, we never did that, but that's what the book said. So the reason for the change is to say, let's evaluate what it is that we've been doing, what we should be doing, and let's come up with something consistent that we can tell a new judge who's got to take the examination and explain how overall appearance counts in a challenge class, and answer. Oh, there's that little thing in there black. Oh yes, here the old method result. This is Susan's incongruity. Oh, that's the picture. My little picture didn't show up. We put a stick in here rather than using my Mac. And I have this great picture of Albert Einstein here. Doing the calculation, he's on a chalkboard, So under the old system, you had 4 times more points that were given to non-STEM classes than to STEM classes, and you wound up with incongruity. And what we want to do, our objective was to create, according to Susan, happy judges. That was her best picture of happy judges. I didn't have any better one. Although this one is wonderful. And happy exhibitors. Susan Klingenpeel was a judge at age 13.
Oh, you're kidding.
And this is her daughter, Madison, who, in fact, is showing roses, and I love the enthusiasm. So, on 6/27/08, the ARS Board of Directors adopted the following changes in the guidelines. This is now how the guidelines read. They say, first, the most important factor in judging challenge classes and collections is the horticultural excellence of the individual specimens. That was stated first. That makes Satish Prabhu happy, because we want to emphasize that. But I do want to emphasize, I don't want to, these are not arrangements. We are looking for the horticultural excellence, and we assign that horticultural excellence 80% of the overall score. Each specimen is used, judge it by using the 6 prime elements of judging that we have reviewed. Each specimen counts equally. One awesome bloom does not cancel out one crummy bloom. We never call them crummy blooms. If you ever call them a crummy bloom, you know that, I know that whoever entered that crummy bloom is standing right next to you. It's the clerk. So you never, ever say that a bloom is crummy. Overall appearance is assigned 20% of the overall score. Here is the heart of the matter. We are simply saying, forget about this 10 points per bloom and 9.1, 20%. How did we come up with 20%? We wrestled over it. We put out discussion. There were people who said it should be 30%, such as me. There were people who said it should be 10%, such as Satish. And we came up with 20, which is what I was after in the first place. I figured I had to go and argue for 30 in order to move the guys off of the 10, because I think that at least should be 20%, my own view. And that in judging the challenge class and the 20 points, the 20 that are now assigned to overall appearance, we look for things such as uniformity in size, degree of opening, form of the specimens, stem length, all of which are part of the overall appearance, and then we throw in the overall appearance. We had a long discussion about this language, by the way, because I think it's kind of duplicative, but the idea is, what is overall appearance? And we define overall appearance by actually using the word overall appearance, and I learned sometime in high school you can't define something with the term by using the term, but we do. So 80% is horticultural excellence. 20% is overall appearance. Here's another way of thinking about it. I call these the prime factors adjusted, the prime elements adjusted, because you see 80% goes to the original prime factors, prime elements, and 20% goes to overall appearance. There's overall appearance at the bottom at 20. And if you take 80% of the other numbers, this is how you judge a challenge class. Observe, overall appearance and form are now equal. And for those of you who are judges who, the rumored judges for whom form is 110 points, overall appearance does in fact matter, but when you compare it with the overall bloom, you're talking 36, 48, 56 points versus 20. So when you're looking at the flower, 56 of the 100 points there are still the horticultural excellence of the specimens. Stem and foliage, balance and proportion, frankly, those all actually affect overall appearance as well. But I think this is kind of useful to get in your mind when you're looking at a challenge class. You got to get in the overall appearance, and 20% is the overall appearance. For those of you who are arrangement judges, you will recognize this. This is the scorecard for judging rose arrangements. And you see in judging rose arrangements, the perfection of the roses, which also includes, for those of you who are not horticultural judges, the other plant material, is 30 points. Factors such as the design principles, of which there are 6 that have 5 points each. So those design principles that actually, in putting together a challenge class, that are applicable is what I've discussed in my book. But there continues to be, and I put this up, a big difference between judging an arrangement and judging a challenge class. Challenge class is not an arrangement. It is a horticultural exhibit, but certain of the principles are there, and the values that are applied to those principles differ. This is also from Susan's presentation. I think it's very good. And this derives also from a number of language changes that are in the new guidelines, sort of a methodology for judging challenge classes. Step 1, we do not touch the entry. Overall appearance matters, and it matters the individual exhibitor has placed that entry, has created that overall appearance, and so we don't touch it, we don't move it, we don't adjust what the exhibitor has presented. Step 2, we review the schedule for the class requirements. Number of specimens required, classification of roses, same or different varieties, exhibition stage of the entries. Do not assume. We have seen, I have seen in traveling throughout the country, a spreading out among classes where, for example, we used to see boxes were only hybrid teas in boxes and then miniatures in boxes, but now we see boxes of shrubs and old garden roses, and we see mixed boxes, and so we do not assume anything. Read the schedule before judging it. Step 3, make sure the entries meet the class requirements. And watch for this one. This has become a big problem of Minifloras and miniatures in the same class. And if the class, we encourage those of you who are involved in writing schedules to clarify what your intent is. If you say miniatures, do you mean to include Minifloras or do you not? There are certain classes, for example, the National Ralph Moore Challenge class, which is also offered at each district level, which calls for 7 miniature roses. That's what it says, and that's the way it's being interpreted. Miniature roses are miniature roses, not Minifloras, not a mixture of them. And some of the districts have made changes. We have down in the Pacific Southwest, for example, we have an English box for miniatures that has a district challenge class. And it now reads that it can be 6 miniatures or 6 Minifloras. It cannot be a mixture of them. I actually oppose that. I didn't see any reason to have to tell that. If you wanted to put 5 fat Minifloras and 1 little miniature in an English box, it seems to me you're going to screw up the overall appearance. But this is something to pay attention to. Step 4, you assess each bloom. Each bloom counts equally, and you apply the factors, the prime elements of judging: form, color, substance, size, stem and foliage, balance and proportion, and then assess the overall appearance of the entry. And this type of language you will find in the guidelines. Harmonious and complementary are words that I proposed. You can blame me for them if you don't know what they mean. But I thought that's what we were reaching for. We were trying to see whether things, play together. They look together, they're harmonious, they complement each other, and the placement of the specimens, the uniformity of form, the size, the stem length, and so on. Let's look at some examples. Classes with foliage. How do you create overall appearance? You create overall appearance first by positioning the containers when they're in separate containers. And there are any number of ways to do this. Those arrangement judges will recognize the concept of rhythm, where your eye moves back and forward. An arrangement, as a horticultural judge, you would walk up, if you saw an arrangement, let's say you've got 7 roses, they're all in a straight line going right on back, it's going to offend your eye. It just is. It's just, you want to see some type of an arrangement that accentuates the blooms. You're looking for the matching of blooms, the pleasing blending of colors. The guidelines continue to state Actually, this is from my older program, and I need to go back and look at that. I think we took this language out, but we may not have, because we got into a discussion about it, about the STEM link. There are some districts that actually stage, you will find challenge classes staged at different heights. Most districts, the judges really don't like it. But if you go to the Pacific Northwest, I saw entries where they stage them like in staircases and so on, and that was permitted. And the question is whether or not that makes a pleasing overall appearance. I personally don't think it does. This is not in the guidelines, but as an exhibitor, I know this concept, and you will find that the lead bloom, even though all blooms are judged equally, you should know that exhibitors will put their best bloom in front so that you walk up and go, wow. You know, although I've seen judges walk up and just start looking at the back first to see what's hiding back there. Some examples of matching blooms. You see how they match. Pretty close in form, the color. This was a stunning entry. I remember this entry at the time. The color harmonies matter, continue to matter under the guidelines, matter 20%. And you can see how Fred and Barbara Wright on the left-hand side there, that's their winning McFarland from a couple of years ago, where they had that white rose and the pink ones fading, you know, back into the pinks at the back. Or Dennis and Susie Bridges. It's always tough to do an Earl Warwick urn. You've got to have 6 double ARS roses. And if you make that entry, you're guaranteed to have exactly 6. You will never have a 7th one. So you've got to put them in there some way to make them, that was his entry. And I thought, you know, it was very pleasing complementary colors. This was the 2005 Nicholson Bowl by Eric Yount. Again, you see the color combinations, the red, the square with the pink, the 3 across the middle with the 2 darker pinks there. It's actually Raffaella, which is a tough rose to get into a challenge class, and the one in the center. But again, the color harmony is something that, you know, we know it, and the color harmony here, I mean, I like that a lot, but it's still 20%. Each of those blooms, I could tell you, I saw this entry and they were fabulous. I saw this entry, it was fabulous because I made it. So I had to put it in there. But again, you see the color harmony. I put the red one in the middle and the 2 dark pinks and the 2 lighter ones on the end. Here's another one I made also of the miniatures. And this one here, just to tell you my thinking, but the judges liked it a lot. I mean, I had, what the heck is it? The Fairhope in the center, but I had Bee's Knees and its Sport, Aaron Alonso, and I put them opposite each, because they're, you know, we put sports together opposite each other, and it really helps the, you know, because the blooms are otherwise identical. And so, and I got the darker roses on the end.
Bob, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What determines how you stage yours, since I know you do this a lot, in terms of how, I mean, you always stage them the same way in terms of?
No, it really depends, you know, as an exhibitor, when I'm explaining to somebody, I will experiment. I tend to come up with a group of 7, I tend to like the horseshoe.
Okay.
Personally, because it brings it in so that you can also, you know, you stage them out like this, and the judge will come up, and the judge has got to do this. You know, when the judge can take the whole thing in without it being crowded together, I view that as a positive. But I've staged that 2 lines, 4 in back, 3 in front. 3 in front, 4 in front, and 3 in back work very nicely. Or as a triangle. So in part, it's the roses
Right. That's
that we have to work with. And so I'll kind of push them around until I can find what, it's like they arrange themselves is what I say afterwards, because there's some way, and you can tell when somebody's very much rushed or not paying attention to it, where you'll have, not only are they, and I mean, I do things, and I recommend to people when I'm talking about exhibiting, the tags here are open because this is after it was judged, but when this was here, all those tags, I know judges don't judge tags, do they? But when you come up and the tag's this way and the other one's this way and the other one's that way and the other one's that way, it has a subtle effect on a judge. And so when all those tags are right smack neat in a row, and I pay attention to the foliage, I want the foliage to not be touching but to be filling it in, and so you wind up turning in the entry until you get that. And you're after the overall appearance in doing that. Here's an interesting exercise. I did this at, this was from the program I did in this district a couple of years ago, but trying to apply it practically to the changes in the guidelines, the overall appearance. This was the, at Seattle National Convention in 2006. And there were 4 or 5 entries in the Nicholson Bowl. Cal Hayes has won this 6 times. Nobody's even come close to that. It's just awesome. This was not his year. He finished third with this entry. And this is not a great Cal Hayes entry. In fact, I feel rushed when I'm looking at it. It's like the ones on this side here, how they're higher. And they almost like this pear at the end, and this just didn't flow. And I think Cal frankly gave up, and he just didn't have the horses, because it comes down to it, part of horticultural excellence. You got, if you don't have the horticultural excellence, you can arrange these things until the cows come home, and you're not going to win. And I think that's what happened here. Is Cal knew that, because he was in against, this is a nice entry from Bill and Riley Reynolds. This is the one that had the moonstone that wasn't, for those of you who were there, but that's another story. The moonstone that wasn't, yeah. Yeah, he had a Falling in Love in there before Falling in Love was introduced, and it was called Moonstone. And judges didn't see it, but I was walking by it, and John Hefner calls me over, and he says, and Harold Baker, I mean, some of the top exhibitors in the country standing there, so what do you think, is that moonstone? I said, if that's moonstone, I'll eat it. And I said, I don't know what it is. I've never seen that rose before, but I know that rose is not moonstone. Well, the thing about it, moonstone's got so many variations to it, and it sports like crazy. I mean, I've got my Horizons program here. Oh, by the way, I brought Horizons for those of you who want Horizons roses. But see, he's got this. I think the presentation here has some really good roses. The presentation is, to my mind, crowded. You got a feeling crowding with that?
Yeah.
And again, it's 20%. I think his roses were as good as, this is the winner.
Whoa, yeah, I remember that.
This is Ron Gregory's. Now he has some beautiful, big roses. I thought the presentation was excellent. So I would have judged both the roses the best, and the overall appearance just was really, really outstanding. Now notice in the overall appearance in judging this, you see this rose, see that vase down there? You see, we're not judging the arrangement of the vases, we're judging the arrangement of the blooms. And an exhibitor, that was one of those crooked roses that in order to get it to be lined up with the other rose, the vase had to be over there. It detracts a little bit, but I don't, as a judge, and no, what's your first thing you look at? You're looking at blooms, big, beautiful blooms lined up with the foliage nicely framing them, and that was the winner. To get a perfect matched pair, I kept looking at this, and I finally figured Susan had this picture in her matched pair. Is somebody has photoshopped, this is actually the same rose. Twisted. I don't know how to do that with actual roses. One container classes, overall appearance still matters. The crowding together, we were working on this. We have language in the guideline, actually some of the original proposed language is the hybrid tea folk. We're saying, well, the bloom should not touch. I think we need to tell the judges that the bloom should not touch. It's nowhere near, it's nowhere in here. I mean, here's a nice entry of Nancy Jean, and the blooms do not touch, and they have fairly decent spacing between them, although the gapping is, you see right there, and it's a little tight to here. Here's another excellent exhibit of the blooms not touching. Here are the masters of blooms not touching. And how they get this in a 4-inch bowl, I tell you, this is the hardest class. Well, on the other hand, this is a master of blooms not touching, Peter Alonso, who we sent from the south up to you. We'd like to have him back. Okay. I can see the point I was trying to illustrate that we had in the guidelines hasn't come up yet because we're looking at the spray classes. This we did discuss. If you're going to put multiple sprays together, they should come out looking like one spray. That principle is there. This was an entry in Seattle. I don't know if any of you were in Seattle. I walked on the floor of the convention. I saw this, and I immediately made a beeline over to it with dragging 2 judges with me. And this color, we can't get this color. Donna cannot Photoshop this to get this color. Rhapsody in blue in the Pacific Northwest is the most awesome color you have ever seen. It's this dusty, purplish, whew. The container bouquets. You see, when we were discussing the roses don't touch, I said, well, what about shrubs and old garden roses? How in the world do you put these things together without them touching? And in fact, these are 2 entries that my wife Donna made in Arizona rose shows, which I think are fabulous overall appearance. This is an entry made by the Belendas, who's thankfully exhibit old garden roses more like hybrid teas. This is the picture that I circulated to the judging group. After we got into the discussion of blooms touching, this was an entry that won the Stemler. It was entered by Jeff and Kathy Wyckoff in Seattle. And this was one of the most beautiful entries I've ever seen in a rose show. It just took my breath away. And it touches. So we have some language in there that says, yes, they can touch in old garden roses, can be touched there. One of the discussions, and I think I need to back it up because we had this discussion in the Pacific Southwest with this entry. Where's the foliage? Should that detract from the overall appearance? Here you see some green between the entries. I think it affects the overall appearance, and I think it's something that we need to consider when we're looking at, you know, I mean, if I'm going to have a bouquet of roses, I would like to see some foliage. We don't require that. One of the things you will see when you get your new pages is an incredibly annoying thing wherein at the beginning of every single type of class, the same words are repeated with only slight variations to emphasize the horticultural emphasis, the horticultural excellence, and so on. I'm just going to warn you about that now. There were some of us, I said, God, I don't like that at all, but we were persuaded that the reason that it was adopted that way is that we felt that the guidelines are typically, people don't sit down and read them as bedtime reading. It's the type of situation where you're looking at something you've never seen before. You're looking at stages of bloom, and you're a new judge, and so you turn to that section, So the stuff that, rather than put it one time in the front of the section, which is important, say, horticultural excellence and all the uniformity and all that kind of language is all there, and it's there for every single type of class that's discussed. We're familiar with stages of bloom. Nothing here has changed. I'm looking for the changes that we have in the stages of bloom. We got into this discussion and really never resolved it. The resolution of the issue of the districts that require you to stage I believe we have language in there, and I can tell you what the principle is. If they tell you to do it this way, then we judge it that way. This is when in Rome, do as the Romans do, and this is frankly more of an artistic presentation. It's more like an arrangement to be set that way. And but if you were applying horticultural factors concerned, that doesn't, your balance and proportion is off on that guy in the back and on the one in the front.
If it isn't designated in the row schedule, then
If it's not stated in the row schedule, if you were judging that challenge class, the overall, that's an interesting question. You're applying the 20 points of overall appearance. Is that a good, to me, you start with the horticultural judging factors, and you're talking the horticultural judging factors, and I'm going to apply them, first of all, to the bud. I'm going to apply it as a bud. But balance and proportion matters. And frankly, balance and proportion properly applied would suggest that you should have a shorter stem with your bud and a longer stem with your open bloom, but staged this way, it's clearly off on balance and proportion. So if you're applying the 80% horticultural factors to this thing, and this is there's 5 entries and somebody decided to stage it like that, it should be downgraded, frankly. Unless they're absolutely required to show it that way.
so it should always be
80% is the horticultural factors. I don't know whether or not in your mind as a judge the overall appearance of that might cancel out.
so in the schedule. It should always be stated which way it should
In the
go.
Pacific Northwest, they actually tell you to do that. This is what the schedule says.
But I'm talking about regular.
Yeah, and regular shows, no.
So those are different stages, they're different heights. Those are, it's not just the camera that's doing it.
No, those are at a different height.
But for a range,
They are staged in one container
right,
with the large open bloom at the bottom, bud at the back, and the exhibition form, and in a straight line.
but for
And that way it usually reads, George? Yeah, it says you shall, and it's called, instead of the cycle of bloom, it's called the progression of bloom, or bloom progression.
Could you repeat the question so that the camera gets it?
Okay?
But in the arrangements, it's better to have the little one at the top and the big one at the bottom because of weight.
In an arrangement, when we're applying design principles, the question is, she's making the point about in an arrangement, this would be considered correct. This would be considered a good design, the application of design principles, a nice feeling of the line. It looks more like a line in a line arrangement. It gives you a nice feeling of the rhythm and the flow and the weight and the various type of things from a design standpoint. It is interesting. We really didn't get into the discussion of the committee. That would have probably added another 100 emails worth of whether or not one can apply the arrangement principles to conclude that this gets 20 points for overall appearance, which cancels out the points that have been deducted for the lack of the balance and proportion of the horticultural entry. I don't know.
In here, it says the exhibitor may choose to vary the stem length of the individual specimens.
Yes.
So it.
We left that, that's right, we did leave that language in.
If there is nothing said in the schedule, the show schedule, then it is up to the exhibitor and the judges have to judge it.
And the judges have to judge it, however, the judges are being asked to apply the concept of uniformity. And so the issue is whether or not the adjustment of the stem length by providing something to, does that really add to the overall appearance? if I'm judging it, to me, it doesn't add to the overall appearance if I'm looking at up and down stem lengths.
For a while, it was mandatory to have them all the same.
It's not mandatory. We never said it, yeah, and the language you just read, as I recall, is exactly, we may have fiddled around with it, but ultimately I think we came back to exactly the language that was there. Yeah. The high-low is now discussed and contains the same type of language and contains language to the effect, I haven't pulled out the exact language, that the form and color should match as closely as possible. This is what a high-low is supposed to look like.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, nice.
I have a program called When in Rome where I've been collecting different ways that things are required to be shown, and Susan had this in her program, and I went, wow, I haven't seen that before, a high-low in a frame.
How many rose shows do you go to a year?
I don't know, I
Resident
judge
judge.
and I enter and,
I know.
and
Get lots of ideas.
I love to go to rose shows. Classes without stems. Here are some revisions, some new wordings from the guidelines. Each individual specimen is evaluated for horticultural excellence, again emphasizing horticultural excellence. The points for each bloom are assigned using the prime elements of judging applicable to the bloom, which tells you the obvious, which is each of those prime elements become of relatively more importance. But then you have the 20% for the overall appearance, which gets kind of tough in something like a rose in a bowl. However, one of the things we have, I think we moved it into several of the discussions because curiously this keeps coming up, where we'll have an entry that says that there's to be no foliage, and we've had judges who have actually disqualified entries because they have sepals. And sepals are not foliage. For anybody who've forgotten that, sepals are part of the bloom. They should complement the blooms. They are, but they are not foliage. There was discussion about this floating requirement. Yeah, Rose?
I was just going to ask this. It says rose in a bowl, meaning that it should be enclosed by the bowl. It should be inside of the bowl. So many times we see them on a flat container or sticking out way over the top, or the container being way too shallow and the rose just sitting on top of it. Is there...
First of all, it's the schedule is what's right. And as a judge, Rose was pointing out that if the schedule says rose in a bowl, you would expect the rose should be in the bowl. Not the bowl should be filled with water up to the very top and the rose floating outside of the bowl. And you're absolutely right. And that's, here is an example. It depends on the bowl.
Right.
But this is a beautiful, that's why I selected this particular entry. You see that fits right in there. It fills the bowl. We had a discussion about floating, and there are some who put in the schedule that it must be floating, and then is it floating if the little peduncle just, the pleats is kind of like an anchor and just touches the bottom, and I mean... We don't, we hope that all judges will not get so carried away with such a detail. But we also implore schedule writers to stop writing that kind of detail, like, rose must absolutely be floating, so that, the whole question is, gee, is that rose really floating in there? Is that rose floating?
Yes.
How do you know? I mean, have you seen the bottom of it? Do you know if it's touching I don't care. That rose, that is a great entry. That's a winning entry. Sometimes the bowl is one of those like silver chalice type thing. Okay, here's one here. You can't get that rose in that bowl. I'm here to tell you because I know that bowl. We got those bowls all over our district. It's a little silver cup that comes up like this. And you cannot get a hybrid tea down inside of it and still have it float because it's going to touch the side of the thing. And so in that case, you know, we judge based on what the bowl is. And here, the reason I illustrate here is that this kind of a bowl, frankly, is the type of rose that is selected matters. Marilyn Monroe, you'll recall, has a fairly flat form and looks better in a flat bowl, whereas that previous one with the higher center looks better in the rounded bowl. There's overall appearance. Although here's an exception. There's the round bowl again. Now this rose is down in the bowl. The city of Carlsbad, which is nearly a single, semi-double, which we won with this entry and floated very nicely down in there and fits very well in the bowl. But part of what I'm illustrating here is that schedules more and more are calling for, you can put a Floribunda in a bowl. And if you put the Floribunda in the bowl, it doesn't have to be a Floribunda with hybrid tea form unless it says so, and hopefully the schedule doesn't say so. So here's a Floribunda, and how do you judge that? You judge that as an open bloom in a challenge class, and then you get down to the overall appearance, which frankly I think is enhanced because it's round and the bowl's round. And getting that thing to stay right in the center is really tough.
Is it preferable to let the exhibitor choose the bowl, or should the societies provide
The judge guidelines say nothing about that. I never show the question is it preferable for the exhibitor to choose the bowl or the society to do so? I think the judge should have some idea, but it should be obvious. If you're looking at the table and everything's in exactly the same bowl, you have a good idea. Now I have in my program on When in Rome, a picture of one where it was, in fact, I call it BYOB, bring your own bowl. And here it was the entire table, and I mean, it had like 14 different kinds of bowls there. So the exhibitor brought the bowl, and I would think that in judging the overall appearance in that particular case, give some consideration to what the bowl is. Now that gets you closer to being an arrangement, because the arrangement judges, you know, are going to consider the container. This is something, you know, it baffles horticultural judges. You mean the container matters? Oh, well, gosh, yes, it's part of the arrangement. Yeah.
I think when the exhibitor provides the bowl, that it is part of the bowl.
It becomes, I think it's part of the staging.
With the exhibitor.
I agree with that. If the exhibitor provides, and I think also is part of the overall appearance. And the overall appearance, and that is even if the society is providing the bowl, then in determining what, as an exhibitor, I'm going to put in that bowl, I'm going to take into consideration what that bowl is. If it's one of those flat type bowls, I'm going to put a flat rose into it. And if it's one of those bowls that rounds up like this, I like to get something, you know, one of those high centered guys that fill up and the size of the rose. You know, how many times have we seen these big bowls, you know, hey, you know, and here's this little bloom that's floating around in there sideways, you know, and that's part of the overall appearance. Here's an interesting, we're starting to see more of this. I have in my program one called the Baton Rouge Bowl, which is a bowl like this, and they just fill them up with floating blooms. This was from Susan's program. That rose, by the way, is called paintbrush. I'd never heard of it before. I looked at it and said, ooh, isn't that pretty? You see that bowl? So the overall appearance matters there too. Here's an odd bowl, but I think this again illustrates, I'm looking at this bowl. This bowl was provided by the society, and I looked over what I had and I said, well, what would complement that bowl? And you see how Seroptimus complements this one. Shrub bowls, we're seeing more of that. And here's the shrub filling the bowl. In the bowl. The English box, we don't add much to the English box. It's the same principles as before, other than, once again, the scoring. Forget the 10 points per bloom. 20% is the overall appearance. You can't get a decent red in Photoshop. This thing was bright red. This was, you walked in the door and here it was sitting right by the door and your eyes went boing with this exhibit by Eddie Edwards. But overall appearance, see color harmonies. There's Marilyn Monroe in red velvet that we put in a box that was a winner. Or if you put them all of one variety, now you want them to match. And again, the first thing to do is look at those blooms. I mean, what is the overall appearance here, frankly? Well, there is something about the overall appearance, because I staged this entry. Look at the sepals. You can twist those guys so that they complement the entry. Here's one with there's buttercream that was at the National Miniature Show. I don't know what to say in terms of overall appearance. Perhaps I could, question in the back.
Is there a standard size for the boxes?
No,
Or color?
no, there is no standards.
Tilted on the, some are flat, some are tilted?
No standard. There is no standard to an English box in terms of its size, placement of the holes, and they come in different sizes, and you can select from among the sizes. We did not, I know that the standards vary. In fact, I get this question at least once every 6 months. Somebody writes and asks me for the specifications of an English box, and the answer is there are none. And so what you wind up with, I have in my Win in Rome presentation a number of examples. I mean, I have one, we have these boxes in Arizona. You had this velvet, I call it the Velvet Elvis boxes, and that's what they look like. You know, and so when you're trying to stage in them now, this is the question I was about to ask. Do we consider the box? In parts of the country, you bring your own box. You go back to Ohio, for example, they never provide you a box. The exhibitors come with their own box. And so we're not going to judge the box, but I think the same principle would apply with respect to the bowl, is to look at the selection of the roses and the presentation, and the box matters. You know, I mean, if I have a black velvet box, I love to put a white rose in it.
Well, it also doesn't detract from the rose at all, one that has the black around the whole thing. Look at the color.
Overall appearance. You know, also, we have a concept in arrangement judges about creativity and distinction and stuff like this. You know, the shepherds in Arizona are masters with the open blooms, and this is one of their winning entries. This is actually where I got the title "Win in Rome" for my presentation, because we took this picture at the Seattle show, and this is an oddity in the Pacific Northwest. They tell you to put a leaf in. Now, you know, I was asked it there by, you know, I had two judges, as a matter of fact. They said, a leaf? How do we do we judge the leaf? It's part of the overall appearance. It's part, if it's part of the schedule, and that's what I said. I looked at I'm being asked the question whether or not the leaf has to be of the same variety in here, and there is no requirement in the show schedule to that effect. But the leaf is part of the overall appearance. In my reaction as a judge and as an exhibitor, as Win in Rome, you show as the Romans do. If this is the way they want to show roses, then we'll show roses that way. We can probably talk, you know, afterwards over a cup of or a glass of something, whether or not that makes any sense, I don't know. That's the way it's done. So I don't criticize it. I just show it and say, this is the way it's done.
Did the question of leaf and leaflet come up
Pardon me?
for that exhibit? The question of leaf and leaflet come up?
I don't know if it did or not. It did not in our team. Here's an American box. The American box is supposed to show a geometrical pattern, so that's part of the overall appearance. And here's an example of a geometrical pattern. 9 of the same variety is not a geometrical pattern. Floribunda English box. One thing that is probably useful to remind people of, or remind you of, is that the word exhibition form gets thrown about in show schedules. Exhibition form, this is exhibition form. It is the classic hybrid tea form. It is not the exhibition form for the variety, so that an open bloom is exhibition form. And we get into real problems with show schedule writers who are writing and saying, you know, I want a Floribunda box, but it must be exhibition form. Well, great, if you've got 6 killer pinnacles like I have here, you make a great box with that. But if you're a show schedule writer, I would encourage you not to use words like exhibition form, just to permit them to put 6 Floribundas in there, because then you can get entries that are like that, which is, I think, wonderful. Shrubs, also, in fact, I think shrubs and old garden roses make better boxes than hybrid teas. I think frankly, the hybrid tea looks kind of dumb sitting straight up like that, whereas the little pancake effect of the shrubs, particularly when you get into, here's the old garden rose box.
Yeah.
That looks silly.
This was the winner at this.
What is that?
That's the green rose.
No, I know that, but what's the box?
The box is the box is the ones Bob Melendez designed and built, and I think we've worn them out finally, and so we didn't. You know, they're this kind of they're wood with a real black lacquer to them. And they got little feet. They have little dowels that you stick in like that, and then fall off at the inopportune time. Overall appearance, I don't, you know, how do you determine the horticultural excellence of the green rose, by the way?
Yeah.
The artist palette applies similar. We did get into a lengthy discussion on the hybrid tea palette, on the artist palette. Here's a hybrid tea palette, the miniature palette. Here's a good one about whether or not we should. First of all, there are those who believe, such as myself and Susan Klingenpeel, that it is a better overall appearance in a palette to use solid colors.
Oh, no blend.
However, the chairman of judges from the Deep South, who's a very articulate attorney, says, if you actually look at an artist's palette, they use that to blend the colors, dummy.
Exactly.
And so blends look, and so after this went back and forth, and we finally said, okay, we're not going to make any specifications about that. And we, once again, is back to the overall appearance. But the overall appearance, we also discussed whether or not, you see, I think that an artist's palette looks better when it goes from the dark to the light. That's just my own preference in staging them. Again, we didn't say so. We leave overall appearance kind of more of a floating concept. You'll have to apply your own, but I think dark to light really matters. But I think I've changed my views about solid colors based on the idea that it's used to blend colors. Another winning artist palette. Shrub palettes. Floribunda palettes. Again, you can do them all. This is big in Arizona, and we're starting to see this a lot more in Southern California shows. These are 3 winning frames, all staged, which we won with. Donna, my wife, is superb. You look at that one in the center. Is that an arrangement or a horticultural exhibit? Yeah, they're all arrangements. And this is where you get into, okay, only 20%, and you're supposed to apply because this is a horticultural exhibit, and it's tough. But technically the rules say 20% is in the arrangement, although I'm certain that the judges in judging these applied more than 20 or 10 points per bloom, or however you do the calculation there. I can tell you that in the shows there, to answer the question, which was, you see the use of the leaves. You're permitted to use foliage. There is no requirement that it be the same foliage of the rose. And in fact, good exhibitors who exhibit in these classes bring foliage. I bring some of my best glossy foliage along, a little cup of foliage that we use in order to put there with the rose. And something that Donna does in lieu of foliage, she likes to tuck the green rose in there. You'll find that in a lot of her arrangements.
It's not your fault it looks like a camellia.
A little bit of advertising as I finish. I am running for ARS Vice President again. I'm running against Jolene. I love Jolene, and I think we should return her for 3 years as web mistress and elect me Vice President.
Are we going to have a debate?
And I extend an invitation next November, a year from this November, in Palm Springs. We have an ARS National Convention, November 11th through 15th. We have an outstanding hotel at a killer rate that we have put together. What a great place to come and vacation, and we're going to put on a superb convention. I'm on the planning committee. In fact, I'm the Rose Show chairman, and so we'd like to get to this on our your calendars and come and visit us next year in Palm Springs. And that's the end. Many of you know that I've taken over the editorship of Horizon Roses, which is a review by exhibitors. We have 86 contributors this year from 31 different states on the newest of the new roses, and they are available for $10. Proceeds after our costs go to support the Horizon Garden of New Roses at the American Rose Center in Shreveport. So if you want to get a Horizon Roses without having to send in your $10 to Texas, I have many of them with me.